Eric Bristow wasn't just a darts champion. He was a fire starter. Loud, fearless, and unapologetically himself, he didn't just play the game, he blew it wide open. When the sport was crumbling under bad deals and broken promises, Bristow led a rebellion that created the PDC, the league that now rules the darts world. But behind the swagger was a man as chaotic as he was brilliant, and his story ended just as unpredictably as he lived. Before darts was a global TV phenomenon, before sold-out arenas and million-pound prize pots, it was smoky pubs, paper scoreboards, and players throwing for pints. And then came Eric Bristow, a brash, working-class kid from Hackney, who didn't just enter the game, he owned it. Bristow left school at 14 with no real plan except a dart in his hand and a point to prove. He learned the game not from coaches, but from pub nights and street-tough competition, developing a throw that looked almost lazy but hit like a sniper. What set him apart wasn't just the accuracy, it was the attitude. He didn't care if people thought he was arrogant. In fact, he counted on it. By the time he was 23, Bristow had bulldozed his way to the top of the sport, claiming his first world championship in 1980. And once he had the crown, he wore it like a king. Over the next decade, he racked up 5 world titles, dozens of major wins, and became the face of darts in the UK. Wherever he went, fans followed. He was brash, loud, and unfiltered, mocking his opponents mid-match, smirking after every bullseye, and lighting up interviews with the same confidence he brought to the Oki. They called him the Crafty Cockney, a nickname that summed up everything he was: clever, cheeky, and impossible to ignore. He wore a gold chain, talked like a hustler, and walked into every venue like he already owned it. In many ways, he did. He brought showmanship to a sport that had none, and TV producers couldn't get enough of him. But behind the scenes, darts was already starting to show signs of a deeper problem, one that even Bristow couldn't ignore for long. The money was bad, the players were underpaid, and the governing body, the BDO, was stuck in the past. Bristow was rising fast, but the system around him was holding the sport back, and he was never the type to just sit and accept it. What happened next would ignite the biggest power shift in darts history. By the early 1980s, Eric Bristow wasn't just winning, he was dismantling his competition. From 1980 to 1986, he reached 7 consecutive world finals, winning 5 of them. His name became synonymous with darts itself. Sponsors lined up. TV ratings soared. Kids across Britain started throwing darts in their bedrooms, trying to mimic Bristow's calm, unshakable stance. He made it look easy, and for a while it was. But dominance always paints a target. In 1983, Bristow walked into the World Championship final as the heavy favorite. His opponent? Keith Deller, a 23-year-old qualifier nobody expected to even make it past round 1. Most assumed it would be a walkover. Bristow certainly did. And that arrogance may have cost him. What followed was one of the most shocking upsets in darts history. Deller, calm and clinical, took down the giant with a 138 checkout that sent shockwaves through the sport. Bristow, stunned, would later admit he thought Deller would choke, but the kid didn't flinch. It wasn't just a loss, it was a message. The king could bleed. Still, Bristow bounced back. He kept winning titles and silencing critics, but something had shifted. The sport was changing, younger talent was emerging, and the pressure was mounting, not just from the competition, but from within himself. Because behind the bravado, Bristow was about to face a battle he couldn't trash talk his way out of. And when it struck, it nearly ended his career overnight. Eric Bristow was never just a player. He was a character, loud, opinionated, and utterly unapologetic. He built a persona that felt closer to a rock star than an athlete. He chain-smoked through matches, drank like a pub legend, and called out rivals with a grin on his face. And for fans, that unpredictability was half the show. But not everyone found it entertaining. Bristow rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, on purpose. He didn't play the media game, and he didn't care who he offended. That made him a fan favorite and a walking controversy, off the Oki. His behavior was just as chaotic. Wild nights, feuds with players, and an ego that never took a day off. And years later, that raw honesty would come back to bite him. In 2016, he was dropped by Sky Sports after posting a string of insensitive tweets about abuse survivors. It wasn't his first clash with the press, but this time it stuck. He was unapologetic, but the damage was done. His reputation took a hit, and so did his public role in the sport he helped build. But long before that, Bristow had already faced something far worse, a silent enemy that crept in when no one was watching. And when it hit, it took away the one thing he'd always relied on: control. At the height of his powers in the mid-'80s, Bristow started missing, not just once, again and again. Easy shots, crucial doubles. It didn't make sense, and worse, it didn't stop. The diagnosis came quickly: Dartitis, a psychological block that makes it almost impossible to release the dart. For a man who thrived on confidence, it was brutal. Bristow was humiliated on live TV, freezing at the O-key, visibly battling his own body. One of the sport's most feared players had suddenly lost his edge, and no amount of ego could bring it back.
I feel like I'm doomed. The game I love to play, that used to be so easy to do, all of a sudden, I can't even throw a dart.
He tried to fight through it. He trained harder, but nothing worked. He was still Eric Bristow, but the magic was gone. So, he did something few expected. He became a mentor. That's when he discovered Phil Taylor, a factory worker with raw talent but no money. Bristow saw something in him and backed him with $10,000 of his own money. "I'll make you world champion," he said. And he did. Taylor didn't just win. He rewrote the record books, becoming the most successful darts player of all time. But Bristow never saw it as a threat. In his mind, Taylor was his creation. And even if his own career had slowed, his influence hadn't. But Bristow wasn't done shaking up the sport. Not by a long shot. In fact, his biggest move was still ahead of him. By the early 1990s, darts was in crisis. Once a staple of British television, the sport had been quietly pushed off the air. Prize money was drying up, venues were shrinking, and players, some of the best in the world, were walking away broke. The British Darts Organization, which ran the sport at the time, wasn't listening. They thought the old ways still worked. But Eric Bristow saw the writing on the wall. He wasn't just angry, he was furious. Furious that the sport he'd helped popularize was being left to rot. Furious that players were being treated like disposable entertainment. And more than anything, furious that no one had the guts to stand up and fix it. So he did. In 1992, Bristow led a rebellion. He and 15 other top players, including Phil Taylor, Bob Anderson, and John Lowe, broke away from the BDO and formed their own organization, the World Darts Council, later renamed the PDC. It wasn't just a bold move, it was career suicide in the eyes of many. The BDO blacklisted them, tournaments barred them, even the media treated them like outcasts. But Bristow didn't flinch. He stood at the front of the charge, using his fame to give the breakaway movement credibility. He wasn't just fighting for money, he was fighting for the future of darts, a sport with TV cameras, proper sponsorship, real prize money, and global recognition. A sport that could survive long after his own career was done. The early years were brutal. The new organization struggled for legitimacy. Some events had barely any audience. Sponsors were hesitant. Lawsuits flew back and forth between the WDC and BDO. But Bristow remained defiant. He gave interviews, shook hands, made noise, whatever it took to keep momentum going. Slowly, it started to work. Television came back. Sky Sports took a chance on them. Prize money started rising. Fans began to notice the difference in presentation, professionalism, and atmosphere. The PDC felt like a new era, and Bristow had helped light the fuse. Ironically, by the time the PDC became the global empire it is today, Bristow's playing days were behind him. He never got to dominate the new stage like he did the old, but he never needed to. He had built the foundation. Without Bristow, there is no Premier League, no sold-out arenas, no million-pound champions, no worldwide fan base. The BDO, the organization he once ruled, collapsed in disgrace in 2020. The PDC, it's bigger than ever. And that revolution, the one that saved professional darts, started with Eric Bristow slamming the door on the past and forcing the sport to evolve. But while the PDC was rising, Bristow's own spotlight was slowly starting to fade. Bristow officially retired from professional darts in 2007, but he never really left the spotlight. He became a Sky Sports pundit, still sharp-tongued, still unfiltered, and still unwilling to play it safe. His presence on TV was electric, but it didn't last. In 2016, after a firestorm over controversial tweets, he was dropped. Just like that, the voice of the game was gone. Yet fans still loved him. He toured pubs, did exhibition matches, and stayed connected to the game he helped build. Even as new stars rose, Bristow was a living legend, flawed, fearless, and unforgettable. Then, on April 5, 2018, everything stopped. He was in Liverpool attending a Premier League darts event when he collapsed from a heart attack. No warning, no goodbye. He was 60 years old. The news stunned the darts world. Players paused mid-event. Fans broke into spontaneous chants of, "There's only one Eric Bristow." In death, as in life, he brought the sport together. But Bristow's story doesn't end there, because his fingerprints are still all over the modern game. Eric Bristow didn't just play darts, he rewrote what it meant to be a darts player. He was raw, unpredictable, and at times deeply flawed, but he never faked a second of it. He brought charisma to the hockey, helped launch the greatest player the sport has ever seen, and led the charge that built the PDC into the global powerhouse it is today. Without Bristow, modern darts wouldn't exist in its current form. The arenas, the million-pound prizes, the worldwide fan base, it all traces back to a man who refused to follow the rules. He didn't die with a trophy in his hand or a headline in the papers. He died quietly, suddenly, but his legacy is louder than ever. Every time a PDC player walks onto a stage packed with roaring fans, they're stepping into a world he created. Because love him or hate him, Eric Bristow wasn't just part of the game. He was the game.